In January 1995, the United States released 14 gray wolves into Yellowstone National Park, a landscape so degraded that its rivers were eroding, its forests were thinning, and just one beaver colony remained alive. What those wolves did over the next 3 decades triggered a chain reaction so dramatic that it reshaped not just the animals and plants of Yellowstone, but the very course of its rivers. But here is what no one tells you. The scientific community is now bitterly divided over whether wolves actually deserve the credit. The viral story has 45 million views. The truth behind it might change everything you thought you knew. This is the full story, from the 70-year extermination campaign, to the political war over bringing wolves back, to the ecological transformation that stunned the world, and the fierce scientific debate still unfolding right now. Most videos tell you wolves saved Yellowstone and leave it there. We are going deeper into the real science, the parts that worked, the parts that did not, and why the answer matters for every country now trying to restore its lost predators. The facts we are about to lay out come directly from the National Park Service, peer-reviewed studies, and the researchers who have spent decades tracking every pack, every birth, and every kill inside this park. But before you can understand what 14 wolves did to Yellowstone, you have to understand what happened when the last one was killed. Because the damage that followed was so severe and so silent that it took generations before anyone realized the park was dying from the inside out. When Yellowstone was established in 1872, gray wolves roamed freely across its valleys and forests. They had been part of this landscape for thousands of years, their presence recorded in the fossil record stretching back millennia. But early park managers saw wolves not as essential members of the ecosystem, but as threats to be eliminated. In the late 1800s, westward expansion brought settlers and livestock into direct conflict with native predators. As agriculture pushed deeper into wolf country, much of the wolves' natural prey was hunted out, forcing the animals to turn to cattle and sheep. The backlash was swift and merciless. Government-backed extermination programs swept across the American West, armed with rifles, steel-jawed traps, and strychnine poison. Inside Yellowstone itself, the killing was systematic. Between 1914 and 1926, at least 136 wolves were destroyed within the park's borders under official predator control orders. Rangers posed for photographs beside piles of pelts. The last known wolf pack in Yellowstone was killed in 1926. By the 1940s, wolves were functionally extinct across the region. By the mid-20th century, they had been virtually wiped out from the entire lower 48 states. The campaign was considered a triumph of human management. Ranchers celebrated, hunters saw game numbers rise, politicians moved on. Nobody stopped to ask what would happen to the land without its top predator. The answer would take decades to reveal itself. With wolves gone, Yellowstone's natural balance shattered. Elk, freed from the pressure of their primary predator, multiplied unchecked. By the early 1990s, the Northern Range elk herd had swelled to nearly 19,000 animals, a number far beyond what the land could sustain. Without any reason to fear ambush, elk browsed wherever and whenever they pleased. They lingered along riverbanks and in willow thickets, stripping young aspens, willows, and cottonwoods down to nubs before the saplings could grow tall enough to anchor the soil. The consequences cascaded through the ecosystem. Without root systems to hold the banks together, river channels began to erode. Stable, slow-moving streams widened and fractured into shallow braids, carrying away topsoil with every spring flood. What had once been a network of shaded, slow-moving creeks became a maze of exposed gravel and sun-baked mud. Beavers, whose survival depends on willows and aspens for food and building material, faced a crisis. As elk devoured the last remaining shoots, beaver colonies vanished one after another. By 1995, a single beaver colony remained in the entire park. One colony down from dozens that had once shaped the waterways. With the beavers went the wetlands. Ponds dried up. Water tables dropped. Songbirds, waterfowl, otters, fish, and amphibians lost their habitat. Decades of unchecked grazing had silenced the pulse of water and life that once defined Yellowstone's valleys. The park looked healthy from a distance. Tourists still came. Elk were plentiful. But beneath the surface, the ecosystem was unraveling, and every link in the chain traced back to a single missing predator. So the land was falling apart. Scientists could see it. But getting wolves back into Yellowstone would require something far harder than capturing animals. It would require winning a political battle that split communities, sparked lawsuits, and nearly failed more than once. And at the center of it was a woman whose own time was running out. The road to wolf reintroduction was one of the most bitterly fought conservation battles in American history. In 1973, the Endangered Species Act listed the gray wolf as endangered, and the greater Yellowstone ecosystem was designated as one of 3 recovery areas. But listing a species and actually restoring it are 2 very different things. For the next 2 decades, the proposal ignited fierce opposition. Ranchers feared for their livestock. Hunters worried about shrinking elk herds. Politicians in Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho fought the plan in Congress. In 1991, Congress funded an environmental impact statement. When it was completed in 1994, it drew over 160,000 public comments, the largest response to any federal proposal in history at that time. Scientists predicted wolves would have minimal effects on other large game species, but would reduce coyote numbers. The Secretary of the Interior signed the Record of Decision in June 1994, approving the plan under a special provision that classified the wolves as an experimental, non-essential population. Lawsuits followed immediately. In December 1997, a federal judge ordered the removal of all reintroduced wolves, but stayed the decision pending appeal. In January 2000, the ruling was reversed. On a bitter January morning in 1995, a convoy of trucks rolled through Yellowstone's iconic Roosevelt Arch, watched by schoolchildren lining the road. Each truck carried heavy steel crates. Inside waited 14 gray wolves captured in the wilderness of Alberta, Canada, fitted with radio collars and selected for their genetic diversity and temperament. Molly Beatty, the first woman ever to lead the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, walked to the first crate. She reached inside and with quiet determination carried the alpha female number 5 into the park's experimental acclimation pen. It was January 12, 1995. 8 wolves arrived that day, 6 more on January 19th. For weeks, the wolves remained in enclosed pens, learning the scents and sounds of their new home. Rangers guarded the enclosures around the clock. Biologists monitored the wolves twice weekly. This slow-release method gave them time to acclimate and reinforce their natural avoidance of people, since being penned was a deeply negative experience. In March 1995, the pen gates opened and the wolves stepped into the snow. 17 more wolves arrived from British Columbia in January 1996, bringing the total to 31. A 5-year reintroduction plan had been prepared, but after 1996, no further transplants were needed. Tragically, just months after carrying wolf number 5 into Yellowstone, Molly Beatty was diagnosed with brain cancer. She was 49 years old and chose to continue working on behalf of wolves and endangered species until her death in 1996. In 2000, the Crystal Creek Pack was renamed Molly's Pack in her honor. It remains the oldest continuous wolf lineage in Yellowstone to this day. 14 wolves were now loose in a park that had not heard their howl in 70 years. What they did next would change the landscape in ways no one fully predicted. Now here is where the story gets controversial. Within months of their release, the wolves began sorting themselves into packs, carving territories across Yellowstone's valleys and forests. Wolves are highly social animals that live in complex family groups. Average pack size settled at about 10 to 12 individuals. Packs defended their territory by howling and scent marking, and research quickly revealed the adaptive value of this social structure. The Druid Peak Pack became the most watched and the most storied. At its heart was Wolf 21M, a large black-coated male whose behavior astonished even veteran researchers. Unlike the ruthless predator of legend, 21M was known for his restraint. In territorial clashes, he spared defeated rivals. Observers watched him linger near the remains of fallen packmates. His leadership earned him the nickname the Gentleman Wolf. But the wolves brought more than teeth. They brought fear. and that fear began rewriting the landscape. Elk, once fearless and sedentary, started avoiding open riverbanks and dense willow thickets where ambush was most likely. Scientists called this shift the ecology of fear. For the first time in decades, young willows and aspens had room to breathe. In some valleys, riparian vegetation showed striking recovery. Tree roots gripped the soil once more, slowing the collapse of eroded banks. River channels that had sprawled wide and shallow began to narrow and deepen. Meanders returned. Pools formed. Into this recovering landscape came the beavers. With willows thickening along the water's edge, Yellowstone's natural engineers returned to work. From a single surviving colony in 1995, beaver numbers climbed to 121 colonies by 2024. Their dams spread water across floodplains, creating new ponds and wetlands. Each dam slowed the current, filtered sediment, and raised the water table. Fish, birds, and otters followed, drawn to the mosaic of habitats the beavers constructed. This is the story that went viral. 45 million views on YouTube. Wolves changed the rivers. Wolves saved Yellowstone. It is a beautiful narrative, and parts of it are true. But the full picture is more complicated, and the scientific community is deeply divided over how much credit wolves actually deserve. In 2025, ecologist William Ripple and colleagues published a study arguing that carnivore recovery produced one of the strongest trophic cascades ever measured, citing a roughly 1,500% increase in willow crown volume. But that same year, Daniel McNulty of Utah State University published a detailed rebuttal, demonstrating that the statistical method was fundamentally flawed. The volume model relied on plant height to both define and predict volume, creating a circular calculation that was mathematically guaranteed to look strong even if no meaningful biological change had occurred. A separate 20-year field experiment by ecologists at Colorado State University reached a sobering conclusion. The removal of apex predators created lasting changes that are not quickly reversed simply by putting the predators back. Some areas had shifted into what scientists call an alternative stable state that resists returning to its previous form. But none of this means the wolves were irrelevant. What is not in doubt is that a trophic cascade has occurred. The debate is about how strong that cascade is and how much of it wolves alone are responsible for. Wolves increased the supply of carrion to bears, eagles, coyotes, and dozens of scavenger species. They reduced coyote populations. They shifted elk behavior in measurable ways. The effects are real, but they are context-dependent, shaped by climate, hydrology, and the actions of other predators and herbivores. Wolf reintroduction changed not only the ecology of Yellowstone, but the economies of the communities at its edge. In towns like Gardner, Montana, wolf watching became a global draw. A 2022 study found that wolf-related tourism contributes at least $82 million annually to Greater Yellowstone Gateway communities. Meanwhile, the feared livestock losses proved far smaller than opponents had predicted. Between 1995 and 2003, wolves killed 256 sheep and 41 cattle across the entire region. The Fish and Wildlife Service spent roughly $30 million to restore wolves over the span of a generation. Today, wolves generate nearly 3 times that amount in economic activity every single year. The honest truth is that nature is not a simple machine with a single lever. Yellowstone's recovery is the product of many forces working together, with wolves as a powerful catalyst, but not a magic cure. Today, between 100 and 120 wolves roam Yellowstone in roughly 9 packs. Beaver colonies have multiplied more than 100-fold. Rivers run clearer in some valleys. Willows grow taller than they have in decades. The recovery is real, even if it is uneven, patchy, and shaped by forces far larger than any single species. What Yellowstone proves is not that predators are a magic fix. It proves something more powerful, that when we restore what we erased, nature responds, sometimes in ways we predicted, and sometimes in ways that humble even the scientists watching most closely. As countries across the world now weigh whether to restore lost predators, from wolves in Colorado to lynx in Scotland, Yellowstone stands as both proof of concept and warning. Nature's resilience is extraordinary, but it is not limited. And sometimes, letting nature lead is the boldest act of all. If this story changed how you see the balance between predators and the land, make sure to subscribe, because next we are going to show you how another forgotten animal, brought back from the edge, is quietly transforming an entire river system in a place nobody expected. You will not want to miss what happens when nature gets a second chance.